Recording is on.
Kaminkate, the Mexihcah. How's everybody doing? Salutations to everybody. Hopefully everybody's doing great. Today we wanted to talk about the term Azteca. Why are we talking about this term? Because many people are saying right now that this is not a legitimate term. This is being thrown out by many people. This term was created by some white guy in the 19th century, Prescott, and it's not legit. And the real term should be Mexihcah, or Mexihcah, or if you're going to refer to these people, refer to them as Mexihcah, not as Azteca. And there's a little bit of confusion, I think, going on here. And many people say these things without giving any evidence, without showing how this is an illegitimate term or it's a legitimate term. So I wanted to present some of the evidence and then share what I've learned, and hopefully others can. So let me share my screen really quick with you. We'll get into the presentation here. All right, so let's see. Azteca, is it a legitimate term? So we're going to look at the etymology and history of the term. So some people, as I said, claim term Azteca is not legitimate term. It was concocted by Europeans and or their descendants in the 19th century. And the most popular claim is that a man by the name of Prescott created this term. So who was Prescott? Prescott was an American historian. He's really well known. He had a lot of contacts in the 19th century. He was born in 1796, 1859. He had the ability to review a lot of old codexes, histories. He was well connected. So could he have created this term? Well, let's find out. So he's most famous for writing the book, The History of the Conquest of Mexico. I'm going to put the link here too for anybody that wants to read it. I think it's worth a read. It's okay. It's based upon sources that are available to him at his time. And it's been published over 200 times in over 10 languages. So it was published in 1843. As we can see, just from a basic search, some people are actually claiming that Humboldt, Alexander von Humboldt, another historian, created the term Aztec in 1810. This is just a Google search will give you this information. And I'm going to show you that's why it's important not to just Google stuff and to follow that as fact. Because there's sometimes more to the story, and a lot of times Google's incorrect because anybody can upload information to Wikipedia and all those other sources. This is actually from Wikipedia, and they're claiming he created the term or originated the modern usage of the term in 1810. Now, Prescott had the works of Humboldt, so more than likely Prescott utilized the term from Humboldt. And when he published his book, The Conquest of Mexico, the term became adopted in the 19th century by most Mexican scholars and then American scholars as well. And it became like an umbrella term for the Nahuatl speaking groups in central Mexico there. Now, as to the etymology of the term Aztec. So the word Aztec in English and Azteca in Spanish, if you speak Spanish, you hear people say Azteca. English, we say Aztec, which both terms are derived from the Nahuatl word Aztecat, singular, or the plural Azteca, the plural. And the most commonly agreed etymology is that the word is or means person from Aztlan, although some claim Aztlan is derived from Aztatlan. So Aztlan, some people claim it's derived from Aztatlan. And that's a different video. We're not going to get into the etymology of Aztlan. So we'll leave that for now. So in accordance with the rules of Nahuatl, which create names of people or group segments based on their location or place of origin, the etymology of the term is as follows: Aztlan plus Tecat, person, equals Azteca. Now the etymology of Tecat doesn't actually mean just person. It could be better translated as entity. The te, that's called a ligature, and the cat is the part that actually holds the meaning. All 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 names of groups or people pretty much will have this ending. For example, Mexihcah, Mexihcat, person from Mexico, right? Chalcat, person from Chalco. So depending on how the locative or the place name, what it ends with, will determine which form of the ending will be utilized. All right. So let's talk about the actual sources. So I'm going to go ahead and just say it now. The term Azteca is a legitimate term. It's been legitimately used and utilized in the colonial times. At least we see it utilized by Nahuatl historians, legitimate Nahuatl historians who spoke Nahuatl, who were descendant of the leadership or so-called nobility. And we're going to look at the sources here, different sources. So this is Don Domingo de San Anton Muñoz, Chimalpain, Cuautlehuanitzi. Big old long name. He's better known as Chimalpain. He was born in 1579. 1660 he died. He was from Chalco, right there in Mexico City area. And he was a legitimate descendant of the rulers of Chalco, Mexihcah. He was well educated, and he was a historian. He wrote many things, many histories about his people and what was going on at his time in the 16th and 17th century. He wrote these things in Nahuatl, and he wrote them in Spanish. So he was born, as you can see, 1579. That's not that far off from the time of the conquest or the collapse of their city-state there. So he would have had direct contact with people who lived at the time, and you can see that the knowledge was still available, still known at the time of that he lived. So let's look at some of the times he used this term. Now, he's most famously for his Anales and Relaciones. Here, I have given you an example. I'll cite the source. It's right there down there. It's a translation, J. Anderson. But here we see, and I've highlighted the term Azteca. And as you're going to see, almost all the historians repeat the same information because this was a well-known story or history in regards to how the Mexihcah people from Mexico City, not as an umbrella term, but the ones from Mexico City, how they came and where they came from. So let's look at it here. Aoninompa ininchan itokayokan Astlan, yeika intoka Azteca, iwaninompa ininchan inicontlamantli tokayokan Chicomostok. Au inin Azteca intoka Azteca, iwan intoka Mexitin. Au inashkan samalawa kin mitoa inintoka Mexihcah. Au kanika kikuikataxiko initoka Tenochca. I'm not going to be reading the Nahuatl because I get nervous reading it, but in the other examples, but here it is. You can see the translation. Their home was the place named Aztlan, hence their name is Azteca. And the second name of their home was Chicomostoc, and their names were Azteca and also Mexihcah. And now their names is really said to be only Mexihcah. And they arrived here taking as their name Tenochca. So here you see the progression of their name. Originally, when they began their migration, their name was Azteca. And as they settled into the valley, they became Mexihcah. But once they established themselves in what later became Tenochtitlan, they became Mexihcah. Now, if you look at the historical record, you see that the Mexihcah eventually split into two segments, those of Tlatelolco and those of Tenochtitlan. The ones from Tenochtitlan were called Tenochca, and the ones from Tlatelolco were called Tlatelolca. This is how Nahuatl people at that time identified themselves, by their location. And we're going to talk a little bit about that more. But this is from his 17th century, early 17th century work. And here's another one. Same author, Malpain. And I'll just read the English. I've highlighted the Aztec there, the Azteca here. Thus it was that the Azteca, Mexihcah, Chichimeca ancestors were ambushed, defeated by trickery, etc., etc. So here you see he's using this term. It's a legitimate term. Now let's go to another source. Sosmoc. Sosmoc is another Nahuatl historian. And he was born somewhere around 1520. So he was born at the time of the so-called conquest or invasion, and he was a descendant of the leadership or the nobility, if you want to use that term. His father was a Tlatoani. He was a historian, a Mexihcah historian, or Tenochcan historian, and he wrote some of the most famous works, such as the Crónica Mexicana and the Crónica Mexihcah. These are go-to sources, as well as Chimalpain, that almost all historians utilize in recounting or reconstructing the history of the Mexihcah and other people within the valley there, prior to contact and after contact. So here's some examples from his work, and this is from a work in 1598, and he's basically saying the same things as Chimalpain. So here we see that he's saying that, and I'll do the translation here in English. In ancient times, they were also called Astlantlaka. Others called Aztecas Mexihcah. And this name, Mexihcah, means Mexicano. So that's in the first example. So he's saying basically that there was two groups. Some were called Astlantlaka, and others were called Aztecas Mexihcah. Obviously, we already know the etymology. Azteca means they came from Aztlan. So this may be referring to different migrations. Again, he explains it. Los Aztecas, llamados del lugar de Aztlán, los Mexihcah, Mexicanos. So we have to remember that at this time, the term Mexicanos, or Mexicanos as we say today, right? This term only referred to Mexihcah people or people from the basin that spoke Nahuatl. And this is a confusion people have. They try to apply ancient term to a modern term, saying that Mexihcah means Mexicano, and it gets into this confusion. You have to look at the terms as they were used and what they meant at the time that they were utilized or created. Mexicano is simply a Spanish translation or use of Mexica, people from Mexico. So it's actually a combination of Spanish and Nahuatl. Again, he says he uses it again, Aztecas, and again he continues to use it. He uses it numerous times in talking about the migration myth. So that's from the Sosmoc 1598. Next person we want to look at, and the final one that I'll be presenting here, is Diego Duran. He was a Dominican friar, and he wrote two classics that almost any historian will utilize and reconstruct, trying to understand the history of Mexico at that time, and the history of the Indies of New Spain, and the Book of Gods and Rights, and the Ancient Calendar. These were written in this late 16th century, so 1581, 1579. It was said he was fluent in Nahuatl, and he interviewed many people, many elders. I mean, he was there just right after the invasion, so he had firsthand knowledge. And as you'll see, he also utilized the term Azteca in talking about the people that came from Aztlan. Here we see two examples of his usages. I've highlighted them. He's using it, esas naciones Azteca, and he gives a false translation, que quiere decir la gente de la blancura. This is because some people said that the term Aztlan meant place of whiteness. Again, down here at the bottom, he gives the name in conjunction with Mexictin and Aztecas. All right, so he wrote that in 1579. So the term Azteca was a legitimate term. It was utilized in the colonial times, in colonial writings at least, by both Nahuatl historians and by the Spanish friars. They both utilize this term. It's a legitimate term. Where's the confusion? The confusion is coming from people saying, okay, that's not a legitimate term. You should utilize Mexihcah. But you have to understand, first and foremost, that in the Nahuatl way of identifying people isn't the same way that we identify people today. So there's a confusion, because nowadays we have these nationalities and ethnicities that we carry with us no matter where you go. For example, if I'm Mexican and I move to the United States, I'm still Mexican. Even though I was born in the United States or my ancestors lived there for 100 years, I'm still Mexican. This is a notion based upon a nationality that you carry with you, that the ancient peoples, at least Nahuatl people, they did not have this. They identified themselves based upon location. So if you moved from one place to another time and established a city state or established yourself in some location, in time you became identified by that location. You no longer were identified with the place you came from, although that might be a part of the history. So all the sources, historical sources in Nahuatl and Spanish, show the same pattern, that the Azteca, as they migrated, changed their name. This is in accordance with Nahuatl thought and culture. They changed their name, they became Mexictin, and as they settled in and Mexico, they became Mexihcah. This is the way that people are identified. So to utilize the term Azteca in reference to Mexihcah may not be 100% correct because they no longer refer to themselves as that, but the term is legitimate. And if you look at Mexihcah as being descendants from Azteca, then there's no real problem in using both terms interchangeably. The problem is when you start trying to utilize the terms with our modern connotations of places or place names. Like for today, example, people say, oh, Mexihcah means people, Mexicans in general. This is true in speaking Nahuatl because today the place name of the countries are not in an indigenous thought. Today we have a country created by Europeans called Mexico or Mexico. So if you're speaking Nahuatl, you could say that everybody from Mexico is Mexihcah, right? But that doesn't mean that everybody from Mexico is indigenous. It just means in Nahuatl, Mexihcah, person from Mexico. And as you know, anybody that's from Mexico, we know we have all different races, all different shades, ethnicities. It's not all one. But people try to play this little trick, this game of words for some political reasons, and say, hey, Mexicano, you're Mexicano, that means you're Mexihcah, that means you're a descendant of these people. No, it does not work like that. You have to understand, after colonization, the way people identify themselves changed. And the term Mexihcah even changed into Mexicano. And at first it was only referencing to the Mexihcah people, descendants there in the basin who spoke Nahuatl. And then it spread to refer only to other Nahuatl speakers, so that if you go into communities far from DF, people still refer to their language as Mexicano, like in our community, Mexicano, in Southern Jalisco, Mexicano, throughout the region. Well, we're not descendants of those people. It's because the term changed, and it's a colonial term. So the term Azteca, as we saw, is legit. Hopefully everybody got something out of that. I'll go ahead and share the links. I've already shared the sources. If there's any questions, go ahead and put them on at the bottom there. Let's keep it positive. Thanks everybody for watching, and thanks everybody for hitting that like button. Te muertas que